Ex cheated on me and left me alone at our wedding for his ex. 5 years later, I revealed his affair to his pregnant wife. Now she's leaving him and taking the house and kids. So I'm a 30-year-old woman who was supposed to marry my ex-fiance, Scott, who's 32 years old. This was 5 years ago, but it didn't happen. He dumped me on our wedding day for his ex-girlfriend, Ruby. Scott and I had been together for about 2 years before he proposed. I said yes, and then we spent 6 months planning our wedding. On the big day, we'd been together for 2.5 years, but he decided to call off the wedding at the last moment when Ruby showed up unexpectedly. I didn't invite Ruby, and she wasn't on the approved guest list. It turns out my mother-in-law, Alice, had added her. Scott and Ruby had dated for 7 years but had been broken up for 2 years when we started dating. He didn't talk about her much, but I later found out why. They started dating when they were 18 during their senior year. They stayed together through college, even though Ruby went to college out of state. When she returned after graduating, they moved in together. After almost 7 years, Scott asked her to marry him, but she wasn't ready and turned him down. They tried to make it work, but it didn't, and eventually they went their separate ways. Ruby even took a job in Canada to get away from the city. After the breakup, they lost touch completely. Although I attended the same college as Scott, I was a junior back then and didn't interact with him much. We reconnected at a co-worker's Christmas dinner, where we felt a spark and decided to leave the party early to spend time together. We enjoyed each other's company and decided to keep in touch. We went on a few dates and soon entered into a serious relationship. After 2 years of dating, we decided to tie the knot. However, everything fell apart when nearly 3 years after their breakup, Ruby unexpectedly showed up at our wedding. I vividly remember the moment when Scott halted the ceremony, claiming he needed to talk about something important. He confessed that his mother had invited Ruby to the wedding and pointed them out to me. Alice, his mother, looked pleased in her off-white dress, while Ruby seemed uncomfortable. It wasn't surprising that Alice had orchestrated this disruption. She had never approved of me from the start of our relationship. Alice's disapproval stemmed from the fact that I didn't fit her idea of an ideal daughter-in-law. I wasn't soft-spoken or what some might call sweet or timid. I'm not the typical ideal daughter-in-law according to Alice. She believed in certain traits that I didn't possess. I was too outspoken, bold, and expressive for her liking, so naturally she brought along someone she deemed more suitable for their family to the wedding. She wanted someone easier to control and manipulate her son in the long run. Not only did she bring Ruby to the wedding, but she also arranged a conversation between Ruby and Scott before the ceremony. Scott later told me about it, using their chat as a reason to leave me at the altar. According to him, Ruby apologized for rejecting him years ago, explaining that she felt too young and inexperienced for such a commitment. Now, after almost 3 years, she realized her mistake and wanted another chance with Scott, claiming she couldn't find anyone better. That conversation undid 2 years of our relationship, and Scott was back to where he started. I tried to argue and convince him to stay, but he believed it would be a mistake for us to get married. Now that he admitted he never stopped loving Ruby and I was just a stand-in for the woman he truly loved, his words cut deep. Despite my desperation, I tried to persuade him to stay, but it was futile. When he asked for the engagement ring back, I couldn't contain my emotions. I flung it to the ground before storming out, driving away from the wedding, the guests, and everything related to Scott. I kept driving until I found a bed and breakfast outside of town, where I stayed for the next couple of days. Scott took care of all the wedding expenses, so I didn't have to spend any of my own money except on my dress. The only time we crossed paths again was when I returned home to gather my belongings nearly 2 weeks after the wedding. Scott and Ruby were there, indifferent to my presence, absorbed in each other's arms as I packed my things with a friend. Their callousness made me somewhat grateful that Scott ended things before we officially tied the knot. It spared me the hassle and heartache of a divorce later on, whenever Ruby decided she wanted him back. In a way, they saved me from a lot of trouble. I've been trying to move on, and I think I've made some progress, but I now struggle with trust issues and battled a nicotine addiction coupled with depression a few years back. I've been attending therapy twice a week to work through it all. Now trying to lead a normal and functional life has been challenging for me due to the toll it took on my mental health. Meanwhile, those three seem to be doing just fine. They got married a few months after I was dumped and now have 2 children, aged 2 and 4, with another one on the way. I only found out about their situation about 6 months ago when I befriended Ella, the new receptionist at my company. We hit it off at a work party and became close friends. One day during lunch, she casually mentioned that a guy she had hooked up with a couple of years ago was expecting his 3rd child with his wife. She showed me his profile, and to my shock, it was Scott. Ella explained that she had matched with him on a dating app 2 years ago, and he had claimed to be in an open marriage. However, she was now questioning whether he had been truthful. I clarified that he most likely wasn't in an open marriage and had been cheating on his wife, especially considering the timing aligned with Ruby's second pregnancy. I shared my history with Scott, and together we scrolled through their social media profiles, confirming that they had been together during Ruby's pregnancy. It was hard to believe that the same guy who left me at the altar for Ruby couldn't even stay faithful to her. When I found out about Scott's betrayal, I was disgusted and felt it was time to get back at him for what he did to me. Fortunately, Ella had become a good friend by then and agreed to join me in my plan. She was appalled by Scott's actions too, especially after discovering he had lied to her about being in an open marriage just to sleep with her. Their fling didn't end after a few encounters, it continued for weeks. Ella followed him on Instagram and saw that his wife was heavily pregnant. When she confronted him, Scott claimed Ruby didn't mind, citing her past dating history during her pregnancy. Despite developing feelings for Scott, Ella realized she didn't want to continue fooling around with a married man. They kept in touch through texts, with Scott persistently flirting, but Ella tried to distance herself, knowing it wouldn't lead anywhere. She understood he wouldn't leave his wife, even if their marriage was open. Eventually, they drifted apart but remained connected on social media. When I discovered the connection between Ella and Scott, Ruby was already 4 months pregnant, and Scott had announced it on social media. Ella showed me the post, sparking our determination to gather evidence of Scott's infidelity. It took us a couple of days, but we compiled screenshots of Scott's flirtatious texts to Ella during their fling. He made extravagant promises and suggested meeting up, even proposing she come over while Ruby slept, unaware. I was disgusted by his deceit, especially since Ruby was pregnant with their second child. Ella suggested taking revenge up a notch, and in our fervor we may have gone too far. When Ruby reached 6 months of pregnancy, we decided to test Scott once more. Despite not being in contact for 2 years, Scott still responded to Ella's message, flirting and reminiscing about their past. Ruby's pregnancy made her even moodier than before, and she was visibly larger. Scott's response to Ella's message suggested he was willing to cheat on Ruby once more. We continued texting him, gathering more evidence, but eventually stopped engaging. 2 weeks ago, Scott announced the birth of their daughter. Within 3 days, Ella and I posted all the evidence we had on Facebook, tagging everyone who knew them. This sparked a social media storm, but I turned off notifications and waited for Scott or Ruby to reach out. 2 days later, Scott contacted me. I had blocked him everywhere after our breakup 5 years ago, but unblocked him to see his response to being exposed. He accused me of ruining his life, calling me names and threatening legal action, despite having no grounds. It was clear he was deflecting blame for his own actions. I felt a sense of satisfaction with what I had done, knowing that Scott would soon be facing divorce and possibly a custody battle. In my opinion, he deserved every consequence he would face. However, my friends didn't share the same sentiment. They believed I had gone too far, especially considering Ruby's pregnancy. They thought I should have let go of the past after 5 years and not resorted to a social media stunt for revenge. I disagreed with their viewpoint. Scott's actions had severely impacted my ability to move on and form new relationships. He had abandoned me at the altar after 2 years of dating, causing me immense pain. Learning about his infidelity through Ella pushed me over the edge. He had betrayed me for Ruby, and now he wasn't even loyal to her. Despite my friend's disapproval, I couldn't understand how I was in the wrong. I had simply exposed the truth. The blame for the cheating lay solely on Scott, not me. Ella also believed we hadn't done anything wrong, but some of my friends felt differently. However, considering the circumstances, I didn't believe I owed anyone an apology for revealing Scott's infidelity and deceitful behavior towards his pregnant wife, especially after he had left me at the altar 5 years ago. Update 1. Hey everyone, I decided not to apologize. After reading through the comments on my original post, I realized I was doubting myself over something pretty ridiculous. Scott left me at the altar 5 years ago to be with Ruby, and then he lied to Ella about being in an open marriage while Ruby was heavily pregnant just to hook up with her. I simply exposed his actions. Yes, I chose to do it at a time that would hurt both Ruby and Scott the most, but they chose to hurt me 5 years ago, so why shouldn't I try to get back at them? I've tried to be the bigger person and let it all go, but somehow the universe keeps bringing me back into his life, and not for a good reason. I don't think I did anything wrong, and if anything, my friends should be acknowledging Scott as the bad guy instead of putting me down. However, it seems they'll never see it that way. They remained friends with him even after he broke up with me on our wedding day. That should have been enough for me to realize that these people were never my friends to begin with, but I guess I was too delusional to believe it at the time. I've come to understand the situation now and have made the decision to cut them all off. I don't need such negative people in my life, and I'm certain I'll be better off without them. Regarding Ella, she faced an unexpected amount of backlash for her actions, and I'd like to clarify her perspective. Ella had no idea that Scott wasn't in an open marriage when she was seeing him. He had convinced her of it, and at that time, he had very few pictures of Ruby on his profile, making it easy for her to believe him. Trust me when I say she's not the type to engage with a married man unless she knew the partner had consented. She's adventurous, but that doesn't make her immoral. The only thing I'll concede is that she should have informed Ruby when she began to suspect Scott wasn't truthful about the open marriage. However, she was hesitant to discuss it with a pregnant woman she barely knew, so she chose to remove herself from the situation entirely and stop talking to Scott. She's been a supportive friend to me, and even if she made a mistake, I won't judge her for it. She's genuinely been there for me, and perhaps I'm a bit biased in her favor. Nobody's perfect, but we're all trying, and Ella is genuinely a kind person. Please don't judge her solely based on the original post. There's much more to her as a person. As for Scott and Ruby, they're reportedly still arguing, and Ruby has been staying with her parents for a few days. I still have 2 friends who are supporting me and keeping me updated since they have mutual friends with Ruby. It's been a week since my original post, and it seems they haven't resolved the situation yet. If Ruby has any dignity left, she'll leave the marriage just as I walked away from my wedding, but considering the people involved, who knows what they'll do? As for me, I've decided to sit back, relax, and enjoy the drama with popcorn. Quick update, remember Alice, my almost mother-in-law who arranged the conversation between Scott and Ruby that ended my relationship? Well, she contacted me today, being surprisingly nice. She wanted me to delete my post to help salvage the situation. Ruby is furious and threatening divorce and full custody of the kids with no visitation rights for Scott unless he transfers the house ownership to her. I declined to help as I see no point in deleting the post when the truth is already out. I have no intention of speaking to Ruby, even if offered money, considering her past actions. I told Alice I wouldn't lift a finger to help them, disconnecting the call midway and blocking her afterward. It feels like closure, and I'm ready to move on from Scott, Ruby, and Alice. Another update, it's been almost a month since my last update. I've been busy with work and honestly forgot about this post. After refusing to take down my post, Scott and Ruby haven't contacted me further. They're now divorcing and fighting over the house and custody. It's amusing to see Scott face the consequences of his actions. Life has come full circle, and I'm doing much better mentally, physically, and financially. I found closure, and I wish them luck for the future. They're going to need it.